Black rain. Webster had always been a quiet town, tucked between the dense thickets of pine forests and the rolling hills that seemed to echo the distant moans of the wind. The townsfolk were used to the slow pace of life, the rhythmic creak of the church bells, and the occasional crackle of a campfire. But on that day, when the sky turned an unnatural shade of lead, they knew nothing would ever be the same. It began just past noon with a sudden, sharp drop in temperature. The air went heavy and stilled, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The birds that usually sang and flitted about the town fell silent, their absence more unsettling than their music. Those who were out in the open, tending their gardens or walking their dogs, felt a shiver creep up their spines, the same way they might feel if a predator had them in its sights. Then it happened. First, there was a low, rattling hum that resonated in the chests of the townspeople, like the distant thunder of an approaching storm. It grew louder, becoming a deafening roar, a thunderclap that didn't come from the sky but from somewhere far deeper. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as people turned their faces upward, eyes wide with disbelief. They saw them then, thin black threads clinging to the clouds, each thread holding the body of a spider. These were no ordinary spiders. Their bodies were the size of softballs, glistening like onyx, with legs as thin and sharp as needles. And their eyes, those grotesque, bulbous eyes, seemed to be filled with a dark, ancient hunger that sent the blood of the townsfolk freezing in their veins. "Take cover!" shouted Mr. Alcott, the town's retired police chief, his voice cracking with urgency. But there was no time for safety. One by one, the spiders began to descend, their spindly legs reaching out as they plummeted from the sky like grotesque raindrops. Their landing was silent, but the dread they brought was deafening. Those who were touched by them crumpled instantly, their skin blistering and blackening like embers thrown into a fire. The few who screamed were the lucky ones, their deaths quick and merciful compared to the agony that came from being touched. People ran in every direction, trampling one another in their desperation to escape. The main street of Webster became a scene of chaos, with screams mingling with the hissing of the spiders as they skittered across rooftops and pavement, their legs making a horrible scratching noise. It was a sound that made hearts falter and knees go weak. Brenda Hart, the town's beloved librarian, stumbled and fell, hitting the cobblestone street with a sickening thud. A spider, large and jagged, loomed over her, its cold, black body casting a long shadow that made her scream. She pulled herself backward, desperately trying to crawl away, but she was not fast enough. A thin leg brushed against her arm, and she felt the searing heat, the way the world seemed to twist and split in two. She opened her mouth to scream again, but there was no air left in her lungs. Across the street, Timmy Callahan, the butcher's boy, cried out as he darted into an alley. He was young and fast, and for a moment, it seemed he might escape the nightmare. But the alley was a dead end, and the walls closed in around him like the jaws of some ancient predator. He pressed his back to the brick and slid down, eyes wide and unblinking as a dozen spiders crawled toward him, their legs shimmering in the wan light. Panic was spreading like wildfire, and soon the whole town was engulfed in it. Those who survived ran toward the old church at the end of Main Street, its steeple towering like a last beacon of hope. But it was no safe haven. Inside, Father O'Connor was already praying, his voice hoarse, as the spiders' skittering made the wooden floor tremble beneath his feet. They were coming in through the open doors, the windows that had been shattered in the chaos. The church, once a place of solace, was now a tomb. But then, just as the sun began to set behind the hills, something changed. A strange, pulsing glow emerged from the sky, and the spiders froze mid-air, their legs rigid, their eyes dull and lifeless. The crowd stopped running, looking up in confusion as a voice, deep and resonant, echoed across the town. "Us. You have summoned us," it said. It was neither male nor female, human nor beast. It was the voice of something ancient, something that had always existed but had been waiting, patient as stone. The spiders fell to the ground like rain, but they did not move. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream, a strange pause that seemed to draw out eternity. Then the voice spoke again, softer this time, almost sad. "It was never meant to be like this." Whispers spread through the crowd. What did it mean? Who or what was speaking? A sudden crack, louder than thunder, came from the edge of town. The ground quaked as a massive spider-like creature emerged from the forest that bordered Webster. Its body was covered in chitinous obsidian plates that reflected the last light of the day, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural luminescence. It was far larger than any spider the townsfolk had ever seen, a monstrous amalgamation of fear and the unknown. "It has come," someone whispered in horror. The creature was not alone. From the twisted branches of the pines, more creatures emerged, smaller, but no less terrifying. They had the same eyes, the same terrible hunger. They encircled the town, an impenetrable wall of living black. Then the voice spoke again, a familiar voice this time. "Father," it whispered, and the crowd gasped. The deep voice from earlier was now clear, but it had taken on a human sound. Father O'Connor's eyes widened, and he staggered back, his expression one of shock and terror. The voice belonged to someone he knew, someone he had once prayed for. "You brought them here," it said. "You wanted them to come back." The townsfolk turned to Father O'Connor, eyes full of fear and confusion. "What are you talking about?" someone cried. Father O'Connor's voice cracked. "It was never meant to be like this. I was trying to save you all." And then they understood. The spiders were not from another world, but from their own. They were the forgotten, the old, the shadow of the past, buried beneath centuries of stories and half-remembered warnings. Father O'Connor had, in a desperate bid to save the town from an even greater evil, awakened them, calling upon an ancient ritual that was best left forgotten. But now, the creatures were not just here to reclaim what was theirs. They were there to punish. The curse that had been lifted was now a debt paid in the most terrifying currency imaginable. The spiders, deadly to the touch, were only the beginning. As the full moon rose above Webster, casting its pale light on the chaos, it revealed the truth that no one had dared to speak. Webster was not just a town. It was the site of an old, forgotten war between man and creature. And now the war had come back to claim its due.